Okay, everybody, welcome back to Talk of the Now podcast. And today we're going to go back to some sports talk. And I've got Jared back on the line with us again today and on video. Jared, how are you doing?
Oh, fantastic, Gene. Thank
And
you
I
for
see you.
asking.
I see you've got the Atlanta Hawks shirt going. Last year wasn't as
I
good as
do.
we'd hoped it'd be, but it was better than anybody expected for the Hawks, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was I mean, I think when it came to the playoffs, they certainly stepped it up. I mean, I didn't expect
No.
much more than them just making the playoffs. And then they got fifth seed, which was probably higher than I thought they would get. And then they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's only the second time in team history. So low bar to clear to have, probably the best season, at least when you talk about playoffs, probably the best that the Hawks have ever had in their 50 years in Atlanta, which is, like I said, low bar since they've been very bad most of that 50 years, or mediocre at best.
Right.
But they're on the right trajectory. We got a few. I think their training camp starts in a couple weeks, so
I
that'll maybe be the next episode. We can talk about the Hawks.
Oh, maybe so, yeah. I was as a casual basketball fan of the most. I mean, I just tend to tune in when I just feel like it, or go into a sort of a phase of liking watching basketball. That's kind of how I've always been. When I was younger, I watched a lot more Hawks, and I loved watching Dominique Wilkins as a kid. And I'm a little bit older than you, but I loved watching him as a kid. And I got really mad when they traded him off. And it was kind of like we were sort of like right there on the precipice of maybe even getting to a finals, and they just traded him off. And as many Hawks fans, I just got really ticked off about it for a long time. And so after that, I just sort of became more of a casual fan. And as a Georgia fan, UGA is not usually in the mix for March Madness. So I always just sort of watch it for the entertainment value. But I will say this year for the Hawks, that was one of the more of all the, a lot of times, I mean, I'll admit that I'd usually just tune in if they make the playoffs, but of all
Mm-hmm.
the times I've seen them make the playoffs, this was one of the more exciting ones I've seen.
For sure, a lot of close games. I went to a couple of them. I went in person to a couple games, and I mean, it's fun. There's only so much time in the day. I spend usually most of my basketball in the fall and winter is I watch college basketball more because that's growing up what I was a bigger fan of. So I'm kind of similar in that I don't really watch the Hawks much until the playoffs, if they make the playoffs at all,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously they had a nice stretch there. And I think 08 to 2016, they made the playoffs, whatever, 8 or 9 years in a row, even though they never really got that far.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, I'm mostly for the NBA. I probably only watch maybe a half dozen to 10 Hawks games at the most during the regular season most years. And then and then tune in the playoffs. And this was definitely a fun one. But I mean, I've always enjoyed college basketball a little bit more. Maybe because as a kid who played basketball more than any other sport growing up, college basketball seemed slightly more attainable than the NBA. Like, oh, maybe I could do that. Some of those guys in college are 5'11" and don't look that athletic. Not that many of them anymore, but back when I was a kid, there were a few more guys like that. Whereas nobody in the NBA has ever. There's there's never really been a spot in the NBA for 5'11" white guys. So
Kevin
that
Nash
was
was
it
pretty good,
was
right?
that's yeah,
Or
yeah.
Steve
Well,
Nash,
that's
excuse me.
true. Steve Nash
Yeah.
was, yeah, that's true. But he was, by the time Steve Nash came around, I was kind of already too old to actually think I could, to actually think I would play in the NBA or basketball at all at that point,
Yeah.
in any major way.
I'm a
But
little
yeah,
yeah,
so
go ahead. I was going to
yeah.
say I have I've liked watching I don't know, the NBA progress over the years, just because one of the not to get into the NBA too much, but just you mentioned that it's interesting to see international players playing in the
Oh yeah.
NBA. For such a long time, basketball was just such an American sport, and then it got so popular in Europe and places like Africa and South America.
It is pretty incredible that it's become so international, and I think a lot of people credit the Dream Team for that. People all over the world watching the '92 Olympics, and that's probably part of it. And the NBA is, just to their credit, does an incredible job of marketing their athletes, probably better than any other sport or any other league. And I think that's a big part of it as well. And you're right. I mean, the last two MVPs of the NBA have been from overseas. Luka Doncic is Slovenian. He won it 2019. And then the Nuggets guy, whose name I'm losing right now, won 2020. So yeah, it's definitely, and it's fun. It's definitely creates more variety in the game. So I find that interesting as well, and it makes the game more enjoyable.
Well, speaking of guys that aren't very big in the NBA physically, Trae Young, I think that he's probably considered maybe a sub superstar. He's not at the like Kevin Durant
right
level
kind
yet.
of tier, second tier.
Do you think he'll ever get to that level?
It's possible. The thing with Trae, from my perspective, not an expert necessarily.
Yeah.
Defensively, probably never going to be an elite defender because of his size. It's hard. I mean, he's always guarding somebody that's bigger than him, stronger and taller usually. But I mean, offensively, he's kind of there already. I mean, he's an elite offensive player already, probably top, 10 to 15 at worst, offensive player.
He reminds me of, who was the guy that played for Golden State? I guess he still does a little bit.
Steph Curry.
Yeah, reminds me a little bit of Steph.
Yeah, that's kind of what they were going for. The front office at the time they drafted him didn't really. They had Travis Schlenk. This is deep in the weeds, I guess now. Well, we've gone there. So Travis Schlenk is the Hawks GM. He came from Golden State. He was, their assistant GM, I think, before. And he made it known before they drafted Trae that they liked Trae a lot, and for some of those reasons. Now that Trae's there are some differences because Trae is not as good of a shooter as Steph, because nobody in the history of basketball ever has been, or maybe ever will be. But and Trae is actually probably a little better passer than Steph, so there's kind of a little trade-off there. The shooting's not quite at that level, but he does see the floor maybe even a little better. And he's not as big. Steph's like 6'3", 6'4", and I think Trae is like 6'1". So Steph probably can defend, probably has a little higher ceiling as a defender.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely what they were going for, and it's worked out better than anybody probably thought up to this point. And so we'll see. That's going to be interesting. They have a lot of young pieces on that Hawks team, so that'll be fun to keep an eye on for sure.
I don't think we'll ever know. This is a semi-different subject of basketball, but just something that came to mind. I don't think that we'll know, maybe like 5 years out of LeBron after he's retired, sort of where he is on the Mount Rushmore of basketball.
Right.
But I sort of sometimes feel like a lot of people want him to edge over Jordan, but I don't know if you can do that.
It kind of depends on the generation you're in, I guess. People that are, especially, I'm kind of probably right in the middle, but people your age and older, they're always gonna, it's always gonna be Jordan.
Yeah.
And then the younger millennials, it's gonna be LeBron. They never really got to see Jordan play. And I saw both. I guess I was 11 when Michael Jordan retired, the second of the 3 times. So I remember watching, and I personally, I always hated Dynasty, so I actually didn't like Michael Jordan as a kid, but I knew he was better than everybody else. That was pretty obvious. And that's another thing where they're very different players, so it's kind of dumb in some way. I mean, everybody has to have an opinion on one or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other apparently, but they are very different. I mean, you know, Michael was much more of a shooter. Like he created the offense for himself mostly, and LeBron's much, facilitates a lot more, as they say. He's a lot more of kind of a passer a lot of times, although he can take over offensively as well. But yeah, it's one of those things where everybody has to have an opinion. But I've always kind of ridden the fence. That it's so hard to compare between eras, and and the fact that they play different positions.
Yeah.
That you can just say they're both great. I don't know that everybody has to have an opinion that one's better than the other, but
Yeah.
that's sports talk. I'm kind of in the minority in not having an opinion, a
Yeah.
strong opinion there.
But it's interesting to think about, I guess, because like you look at when I think about basketball, when I knew it in its, I don't know if it was its peak back in the 80s, 90s, but I think about, you know, Jordan, Bird, Magic, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I was trying to think of maybe a Karl Malone even back in those days.
Yeah,
I'm sure that people like Steph Curry and LeBron could easily, challenge those guys if they were to, go in a time machine and be able to play against them or whatever.
for sure. The game's so different now. It would be interesting. I mean, that's another thing people talk about, but it's obviously an unanswerable question. But
yeah,
the game's very different. If you drop Steph Curry in a game in 1991, they would think, and the first time he took a shot from 10 feet behind the 3-point line, nobody would guard him. Once he hit 3 or 4 in a row, they wouldn't have any idea what to do at that point. But not that but if you stuck him there for a whole season, they would probably adjust to an extent. But that would be it would be interesting. But I think a lot of people are a little too quick to, it's always there's always that thing, like kind of like I was saying earlier, like one generation is always going to say, oh, it's never going to, nobody's as good as the 80s or the 90s. But in actuality, because we're always, the human nature is to always keep perfecting these things. Really, now the way that players work out, and all the training that they do, specialized training, it's probably they probably are better. Now, that doesn't mean that if you took a guy from the 80s and Michael Jordan, and he grew up in the late 80s and 90s instead of growing up in the 70s, that he wouldn't be just as good now, but he'd be a different player because the way they play the game is different now. But yeah, I mean, it would be kind of unfair if you dropped these guys back in the past, because they have the skill set because they can shoot. The shooting is so much better now on a whole, that it would definitely, I think people underestimate how good the players now would look if you dropped them back then. Not that the other players, if they grew up with the same kind of training, the players from the past, that they wouldn't be able to do the same thing. But it's just, it's just different. They're just different eras. So
yeah, I guess that can kind of account for most modern sports, huh? Football, baseball, basketball, maybe even hockey.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at baseball, if you put, now every baseball team has 4 or 5 guys that throw 97, 98 miles per hour. But like back when we were kids, that was like 3 or 4 guys in the whole league, could throw that hard.
It was like Nolan Ryan and everybody else.
Yeah, it was Nolan Ryan and J.R. Richard in the 80s. And then in the 90s, it was, Randy Johnson.
Oh, gosh.
Could throw that hard. But there was always just a couple guys. And now it's like, every team, there's guys in the bullpen that have like a 5 ERA, but they throw 97 miles per hour.
Man, watching sports back in the 90s, I just remember, if Randy Johnson, you probably were the same way. If you were watching random sports, just channel surfing, and you saw that Randy Johnson was pitching, you're like, all right, I'm just going to watch this for the next hour, just because it was so incredible to watch a 6'10" guy throw a baseball.
Yeah, no, he was he was definitely one of the more unique guys from when I was growing up, Randy Johnson. The one thing I remember about Randy Johnson is that Chipper Jones always hit him really well as a Braves fan.
Did he really? I never
That was
noticed.
always something that, but none of the other Braves hit him well. So he still usually, they still usually, it was still usually a really low scoring game. But
Yeah.
and they, the when he was with the Diamondbacks, mostly, obviously when he was with the Mariners, the Braves never really faced him. But when he had those 3 or 4 really good years with Arizona, yeah, it was never somebody that, well, if you were rooting for the other team, it's not somebody you wanted to see on the mound. But it
No.
was a different. I mean, it there was something very unique about watching him because he was, like you said, he was so tall
Yeah.
and very intimidating just to look at with the mullet and the mustache. And yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, definitely definitely a character. It seemed actually, when if you see an interview or what, he seems like a pretty normal guy, but you would have thought he was, the meanest guy out there just looking at him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the size was crazy. You don't see that very often, the 6'10", 6'11" guys. But so that definitely was a big part of the mystique. But yeah, he was
Yeah.
he was great, elite for
Well, no
sure.
kid especially with the wingspan, when he gets his arm and he's like coming down the angle with the baseball. I mean, I don't know what that does to your peripheral. I mean, just thinking back when I used to sit in the batter's box, I mean, I can't imagine what that does to your peripheral vision when you're trying to track the ball coming out of his hand toward the batter's box, if how that angles into your line of sight. I mean, it depends on the person, but still couldn't have been
Right.
easy.
Yeah, I don't know how a left-handed hitter would ever get a hit off of him. He's throwing it from the way he threw, kind of that 3/4 angle. He's throwing it from behind your head, basically,
Yeah.
coming across the plate away from you.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean, and they didn't hit him that often is really the answer, uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, you wonder. I mean, it was never a surprise that he was, if you were watching a Randy Johnson game and he had thrown 7 shutout innings with 12 or 13 strikeouts, you were never surprised. It was just kind of, well, that's today. He's got it today.
Day at the
Uh,
office.
yeah, what are you gonna do?
Well,
Tip
I
the
guess
cap.
I didn't mean to talk about basketball for like 20 minutes, but good transition into
Well, here we are.
we'll talk about baseball last because that's about to get into the playoffs. But
Mm.
recap a little bit of let's start with college football.
Mm-hmm.
We had a few surprises for the opening games in the second week. What did you think? What was your impression so far?
To me, college football biggest surprise so far is that Clemson kind of looks like they stink. I don't think they actually stink. What their offense does right now, for sure. I know Georgia's defense is great, so the fact that they only scored 3 points on Georgia, okay, give them that. But then only scoring 14 points at home against Georgia Tech, that's kind of a big red flag. Georgia Tech's not exactly a powerhouse
Mm,
these days. It's not. This isn't 1998 or whatever. Joe Hamilton's not playing quarterback. So
yeah.
I don't know if you really want, only beating Georgia Tech by 6 points is definitely a red flag. So I think Clemson on the negative side and Ohio State have both not looked very good.
Mm.
And I think when we talked last time, I was saying, well, it'll be Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and somebody. That'll be your Final Four, just like it is every year.
Well,
But I don't
yeah,
know, maybe not. Maybe not. Alabama still, yes. Although Florida gave them a better game than I would have thought,
for sure.
especially once Alabama got up 21-3. I thought that game was over, but I'm not surprised Florida's good. I don't think that really. I think that more increased my opinion of Florida as opposed to decreasing my opinion of Alabama. I think Alabama's still the best team in the country. But yeah, I probably would have said, Ohio State 2, Clemson 3 coming into the season, but I don't know if either of those teams are even, in the top 8 or 10 right now when you
I'm
look at
looking
how
at
they're
the
playing.
looking at the top 25. Ohio State's number 10 actually right now.
Right. Well, yeah, in the polls, yeah, that's not surprising. I guess
Mm.
in my opinion, I'm not sure
Oh
they
yeah, yeah.
are. But yes, yeah, that's around. I think Clemson's around there as well in the back half of the top 10.
Yeah, that Florida
But
game was definitely that was much more turned out to be way more interesting than I thought it would be.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, right now, Alabama's still one, Georgia's two. I think that's understandable. Georgia's offense has unanswered questions as well because they didn't exactly light up Clemson. Uh, and then, they've played mostly cupcakes since. I mean, South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think is that good this year. So I'm not sure that game, holds a whole lot of water, but we'll see. I think Georgia has Arkansas coming up in a couple weeks. That'll be interesting.
Mm.
Arkansas is one of the surprise teams so as far as how good they've looked. The last couple weeks, first week they almost lost to, or they were losing at halftime to Rice, I think. But they've looked pretty good the last couple weeks. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think Georgia. I think I would have Georgia number two, even though they have a lot more questions to answer than Alabama does, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That Florida State Notre Dame game, I imagine some Florida State fans were thinking, so you're saying there's a chance after that
oh, I
game, but
know.
you know,
Yeah,
it was a fun game to watch though.
that was the best game of the first weekend, and then, which it feels like this happens with Notre Dame a lot. Although they have had a couple Brian Kelly teams where they were legitimately good, they just can't quite get to that Clemson Alabama level, so they lose when they make it to the playoffs. But um, there have been a couple of times in the last 10 years where Notre Dame's in some epic game with one of the other with a power team of Michigan or Texas or somebody, and then it's like, oh, these teams are both good again, and then it turns out that actually, they're both just mediocre, but they're the same level of mediocre, so they played a really great game early in the season. And
Yeah.
that might be more what we're looking at as far. Notre Dame has not. Obviously, Florida State has gone on to lose their next two games after that, and really, kind of put a damper on that, on how good that game seemed to have been. But Notre Dame hasn't exactly covered themselves in glory either, even though they haven't lost. They beat
Mm-hmm.
Toledo by 2, I think, and then they beat Purdue last week by 10 or 14. Purdue's not that good this year, I don't think so. So yeah, a lot of questions for obviously Florida State bad. We can probably say that at this point. Notre Dame, the fact that they beat Florida State no longer really means much, except that it was a fun game to watch in the moment.
Yeah.
But they still have all their toughest games ahead of them. They play Wisconsin Saturday, so that should be a good game, and then they play Cincinnati, who's ranked in the top 10 the next week. So
I
we'll
always,
know
yeah,
we'll know more about Notre Dame in a couple weeks.
I always give Florida State E for effort when it comes to their fan base because I mean they are always out there like they act like they're in the playoffs for every game. I mean they're pretty exciting fan base there.
Yeah,
I'm
I think they really thought they had something there after that after that game. But and then the way they lost that second game to Jacksonville State, obviously I didn't actually watch any of that game, but the way they lost on that Hail Mary, which wasn't even really a Hail Mary because it was the guy caught it at like the 30-yard line
Mm-hmm.
and still and then ran in the rest of the way. That's not the way to follow that up.
Well, I
Uh,
see Michigan inching up a little bit there, Jared. They're
there there's a lot of articles being written about about Michigan and how good they've looked this year. And then if you look in the comments, it's all Michigan fans that are like, don't stop giving us false hope. It's like nobody wants nobody wants to believe yet.
here
They've
are
looked better. They've looked better than fool me once, shame on me, etc.
uh-huh.
Uh, but they've looked better than I thought they would. Washington. That it's another thing. Kind of like I was saying with Notre Dame, except Michigan's actually blown out the teams that they've beaten so far. But none of those teams are especially good. Washington, people thought was going to be good, but they had the week before Michigan beat them, they had lost to Montana. So who knows? I don't know if any of those teams are actually good, but it's all. I'd rather beat the terrible teams by. I think Michigan's won by an average of like 40 points a game. I'd rather do that than win by by 2 or 10 or whatever, like Notre Dame has the last couple of weeks. So yeah. I mean, I think they're probably better than people expected, but they still, once again, they have all their toughest games are are still ahead of them. And then the fact that Ohio State hasn't looked good is really just making Michigan fans more nervous that, of course, by the time we play them, I'm sure they'll have it figured out.
Yeah,
But
of course.
that's just brought on more articles like, oh, look how bad Ohio State's looked and look how good Michigan's looked. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Right. Just a
But
reminder that
I've been happy. I've been happy with the results so far, for whatever it's worth.
And Jared is our Michigan, our resident Michigan fan here,
correspondent
and I'm the
for
Georgia,
Ann Arbor.
Georgia resident fan here, correspondent from Ann Arbor. Oh man, and of course, it's funny to me because looking at the top 25, and we'll move on to the NFL in a second. You always see it like Oregon. I'm just going to name off a few that I see. It's almost hard to assess this time of year because you see Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, the Notre Dames, maybe even the Iowa teams. It's like you can't ever really get a good grasp of what they are until you get like toward the end of the year, it seems, because of who they face and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who don't. It doesn't matter anymore because the polls aren't part of the selection process for the playoffs. But back when the polls were part of the BCS, there were people who thought there shouldn't be preseason polls because, you have these teams that get ranked really high, and then they beat all the cupcakes on their schedule. But, really, has now Alabama, they have actually played a couple, especially one especially tough game, and Georgia as well. Probably with Clemson, like I said, Clemson has a lot of questions, but there are some teams that are still ranked, way up high, like Oklahoma, who haven't really looked that good, and they haven't really beaten anybody that impressive yet. Whereas, you have Oregon, who beat Ohio State already, which is, and then you have Penn State, which Penn State actually has already beaten, Wisconsin, and Auburn on Saturday. Those are probably the best two wins that anybody has. So really, if you're saying who has the best resume so far, probably Penn State's should probably be up there, 2 or 3 somewhere up there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start further back in the rankings, it's harder to move up until, like you said, you get later in the season. So the polls are just kind of a fun thing. And some people are still say there shouldn't be preseason polls, but my opinion is it doesn't matter since they're not used as part of the selection process for the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Let them have their polls. It's nice. People like to see the number next to their team, on the scoreboard or when they're talking about the game on College Game Day or whatever, and not really any reason to take that away from people. But the rankings, you're right, the rankings are pretty useless at this point for the most part.
I guess it's the beauty contest part of it in some ways.
Yeah.
And it always makes it more fun for me. Like I said, just as a casual fan looking at things, okay, I can look at rankings to see what game might be interesting this weekend to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Because I just looked at Penn State's schedule. They've got 3 interesting games if the season continues the way it is, maybe 4. They've got they're playing Iowa on October 9th. They got Ohio State on October 30th, and Michigan on November 13th, and Michigan State on the 27th. So things could be interesting.
I mean, Penn State, they've probably looked the best of anybody in the Big Ten this year, so that'll be interesting. That fan base is not. They've won one Big Ten championship in the last 10 or 12 years, but they haven't been to a playoff yet. That'd be interesting. They probably the slight favorite in the Big Ten. If you think the first few weeks of Ohio State are descriptive of the way that team's going to be, then Penn State would probably be smart money as far as winning the Big Ten, especially because they get Michigan at home. That game is in State College, so that's good for them. So that's definitely a team that's surprised a little bit, I think, this year. So we'll see. Like you said, they still have a lot of tough games in front of them.
Well, moving on to the NFL, I don't even want to because as a teetering Falcons fan,
Yikes.
there are years where I almost decide not to be a Falcons fan anymore. uh,
This would be a good year to sit out if
oh
you
my
want,
word!
if it's something you're inclined to do.
I just, I mean, it's been kind of an interesting. I mean, I do sit down and sort of watch NFL. Sometimes I get more into it than other times, but
Hmm.
they had there's some interesting things going on, I guess, right now. Green Bay's not looking as good as I guess a lot of people thought they might.
For sure. I mean, they got absolutely stomped on by New Orleans the first week. And then, Monday night they beat the Lions, but that's rite of passage. So if you lose if they lost to the Lions, that really would have been time to sound the alarm.
Mhm.
But yeah, definitely, then there's a lot of drama with Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. Uh, People said he was demanding a trade at one point in the offseason, then he said he never did that. Then he had I didn't watch the interview. I think he did an interview with Aaron Andrews, which I only saw snippets of, but the clip that they put on the in the preview for the interview made it sound like he was pretty upset still with the front office in Green Bay. They haven't been drafting that many offensive players lately, but except that they drafted a quarterback, which I don't think he liked very much a couple years ago. Um, and so yeah, I think that's definitely, if you like drama, Green Bay is definitely a place that people are looking right now to see what the next big story is going to be if Aaron Rodgers is actually
Yeah.
happy with that situation, or if he's just going to retire and go off with his Hollywood fiance that he picked up during the
do
COVID
do in,
COVID year.
do insurance commercials, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I it's interesting to me to watch. I mean, obviously until obviously till Tom Brady decides to retire, that's pretty much going to be your front page story for the NFL, I guess, because everybody just how much longer will Tom Brady go? You know.
Yeah, I mean with Drew Brees now retired, Ben Roethlisberger on the back end, definitely lost a step or two or three the last few years. Matt Ryan kind of in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
and also obviously Matt Ryan has no help around him at all. Brady and Rodgers, a lot. I mean, in my opinion, those are the two best quarterbacks of the 21st century. I don't really think it's that close. Peyton, obviously, well, Peyton's close, so that's not fair. But as the guys that are still playing, they've had the two best careers by far.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right about that. I mean, there's nobody right now, like now that Breeze is retired, Peyton and Breeze have retired. There's nobody else currently playing that's on the level of those two guys.
Right.
Obviously, Mahomes is on his way probably to being one of those guys that we talk about in the future, but at this point he's still only 5 years into his career or whatever. So
I don't know why Tampa Bay reminds me so much right now. I guess because of like you said, Peyton Manning, like they remind me of what the Broncos were doing at the end of Peyton's career when he came back and won two Super Bowls. You know.
yeah, well, they are probably better defensively than people think because they think they have Tom Brady and that's why they're so good. And Tom Brady, to his credit, I mean, he's 44 years old and he doesn't he looks like, I mean, you're talking about Peyton Manning, especially, and Peyton Manning's last year in Denver. I mean, he was pretty bad, which was his last year period, which is the year they won the Super Bowl. I mean, he at one point, he got hurt and then he kind of got replaced and he was the second on the depth chart for a little while to Brock Osweiler, who's not exactly a household name.
That's right.
He ended up and because Brock Osweiler was not good, they ended up going with Peyton, but he was really just a game manager for that team, as they say. That season, their defense was so good, and Tampa last year, their defense was also, especially their defensive line, is probably really the bigger reason they won last year than Brady, although Brady, is still a top 4 or 5 guy probably. But you're right in that way that probably because Brady is their quarterback, the defense doesn't get enough credit. And I think up until those the playoffs, or that Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl, people kind of didn't realize how good the Broncos defense was. And then basically won them the Super Bowl because Peyton was, kind of falling apart at the seams by the end of that season.
I'm trying to remember. Did he win the Super Bowl? Or did they win the Super Bowl his last 2 seasons, or was it just that last season?
They won his last season. They made it to the Super Bowl 2 years prior. They had made it and lost to the Seahawks.
Okay.
That team, Peyton was really good that year. I think he set the touchdown record that season. He broke Brady's touchdown record from the 16-0 team. But then they got beat very soundly in the Super Bowl by the Seahawks that year. So he went to 2 Super Bowls with the Broncos, but he only won the one, which was his last. I mean, literally his last game of his career. Similar to what Elway did with the Broncos.
Oh man,
back in the 90s.
Sometimes I'm like, Falcons, could y'all do something like that? I don't know. I look at the Falcons and I'm like, oh my word. I didn't even know what an answer might pretend to be.
They need a lot. I didn't watch much of their first game. But they showed a little bit of fight against the Bucs, to their credit. Yeah. They could have really, really gotten blown out in that game, and they kind of made it interesting a little bit in the third quarter. But yeah, there's a lot. They need a lot of help. I think I saw somebody say that Matt Ryan on his passing plays only has an average of 2 seconds to get rid of the ball before he's pressured. So I think the offensive line is maybe the big issue, at least offensively. Seems to be the big issue for the Falcons, and I know their offensive line is very young. I think 3 of the 5 starters they've drafted, at least 3 of their 5 starters they've drafted in the last 2 drafts. So hopefully those guys are getting better, I guess. But right now that seems to be a big struggle.
We can only hope
for the Falcons. Yeah, I mean, this year, I think for the Falcons, you're just hoping that you see something probably out of the new coach. Good game plans or adjustments. So you think you got the right guy, but the talent's not there this season. So, you really are just going to hope to see glimpses probably if you're a Falcons fan this season.
Well, yeah, I can see that. Maybe I'll just adopt the Buffalo Bills as a favorite team to watch. I don't know. We'll see.
They're fun. They are a fun team. I enjoy watching this Bills team. For sure.
Well, let's round it out real quick here with baseball. So we don't. Let's see. I haven't been watching the Braves nearly as much as I have, but I will start watching them sooner as they get close to the playoffs and when it starts. I don't know. I'm looking at a chart from MLB.com, and it looks like the wild card is going to be St. Louis and LA and the Blue Jays of Boston. Is that what you got?
Yeah. So the last time we talked, we were probably talking about the second place team in the NL West is going to host the wild card game because those are the 2 best teams in the National League, the Giants and the Dodgers. One of them is going to be in that 1-game playoff that they're going to have about a 20-game better record than the team they're playing. But they'll have, anything can happen in 1 game. So that'll be something for those fans to be nervous about after they win 104 games or whatever they're going to end up winning. But yeah, we probably would have been talking about the Reds and the Padres for that second wild card spot at the time, maybe the Phillies. But I believe the Cardinals have won 11 games in a row.
Dang.
And so they've now got a little bit of a stranglehold on that spot. So yeah, right now it would be the Dodgers, but I think the Dodgers are only a game back of the Giants, so it could still possibly be the Giants in that game. But it'll be one of those 2 teams. And and yeah, probably the Cardinals, which has kind of come out of nowhere in the last week and a half, to really almost cement that spot. The Padres have been very bad lately, and so they're pretty much out of it at this point. The Reds might have a slight chance still. Probably, but I don't know if they have any games left against the Cardinals. That would probably be about their only shot of catching the Cardinals at this point, is actually being able to play them. So yeah, you're right. And then American League, yeah, you got the three AL East teams behind the Rays. It's going to be probably two of those teams. So Blue Jays, Red Sox, Yankees, two of those three are probably going to be in that AL wild card game.
I didn't realize the Yankees were trying to squeeze in there.
Yeah, I mean, they're a couple games back of the other two teams, I think, but it's probably going to be two of those three, which I think that's an interest. I mean, if it ended up being Red Sox Yankees, then that's a huge boon for whichever network is broadcasting that game this year. But the Blue Jays are fun. The Blue Jays are a fun team. I don't know if you're familiar with their roster, but they've got the sons of three guys that I'm sure you remember well. They're Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is the Blue Jays' best player, leading the American League in home runs and I think batting average as well. And then Bo Bichette, Dante Bichette is his dad.
Oh wow!
All-star outfielder for the Rockies in the 90s.
Bo Bichette. Okay.
And then Cavan Biggio is also on that team. Craig Biggio's son.
Really?
Yeah. So they got three. They got three guys, three sons of all-stars that are three of their better players. Cavan Biggio's been hurt. I'm not sure if he's back right now, but Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is. If it weren't for Shohei Ohtani in Los Angeles for the Angels, being one of the top, 8 or 10 pitchers, in addition to being the second best hitter in the American League, which is cemented probably him as the MVP. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is probably going to finish second in the American League MVP voting by a pretty wide margin, because he's a couple RBIs away from winning the Triple Crown. I think he's second in RBIs and first in average and home runs right now.
Dang, that's impressive.
So and he's only, he's probably, he's only 22 or 23 years old. So
to age myself, I can remember when his dad Vladimir Guerrero was
21, right?
Yeah, when he was like a rookie
for an
Expo, and I remember watching him thinking that is a very big swing that guy has.
Yeah, he was probably one of my favorite non-Braves players. Wow. In the 90s. Yeah. It helped that the Expos after 94 were never really a threat. So they were kind of just like the cute little team in the corner, like, oh, the Expos. But he was fun to watch. I mean, he used to swing at everything.
Yeah.
He'd hit balls that were, I think there's a highlight you can find of him, hitting a line drive single off a ball that bounces in the dirt before he hits it, but he used to be one of the best bad ball hitters, as they used to say, just swinging at stuff that wasn't even close to the plate and hitting ropes all over the place. So, and
he had one of those very common, awesome sounding Latino first and last names.
Right. Yeah. The Vladimir is always, it's kind of a random name.
Yeah. I always like the name
throw in there, but
I always like the name Nomar Garcia Pera.
Yeah. Nomar is a cool name. I believe Nomar, his dad's name is Ramon, and Nomar is Ramon backwards. I believe that's where that name came from.
No way. Oh, okay.
I never knew that is kind of a cool name. For sure.
Geronimo Guerrero.
Guy, Nomar.
Yeah. There've been a lot of cool Latino sounding names to me in baseball. Maybe it's because I'm not used to Latino names or, South American names often, but
yeah, I love baseball names. There's some guys that I would always, sometimes there are some guys that I would like just because they had a cool name.
Yeah.
And then they'd end up kind of not being very good, but I'd be upset, but
yeah,
I'd see some guy that was on one of the Braves minor league rosters and I'd be like, man, that guy's name is so cool. I hope he's good.
And even the white guys still have some cool names, but
Yeah, so I mean, I've always liked Dansby Swanson. I've always thought is like
yeah.
such a perfect baseball name
Dansby. Yeah. I
for
mean,
the
Chipper
Braves.
Jones. I mean, Chipper is
Chipper as
like the
well,
perfect
yeah,
baseball
for
name.
sure.
It's right up there with like some name from like the 40s, whereas Hot Papa Brown or something like that. Or
Right, exactly. Yeah,
I love the nicknames they used to
Rabbit
give them.
Marinville.
Yeah,
Yeah, all those
Lefty.
guys.
Uh, People named Lefty or
Yes.
Three Finger
Oil
Brown, things
can
like that.
Boyd.
Oil
Yeah,
Can Boy, that was a great one.
for
Yeah,
sure.
we'll have to do maybe we'll do a segment one day where we just talk about cool baseball names.
We should draft our favorite baseball names. No,
Yes.
that would be a good one.
Um,
Uh, but
that's
yeah,
funny.
so going back to playoff preview. So yeah, those are gonna be your wild card games. Probably it's basically like I said, NL either Dodgers or Giants against the Cardinals, and then two of those Blue Jays, Red Sox, Yankees in the AL.
Showing my ignorance
Um,
again. These are still
yeah,
one game eliminations, right?
one game. Yeah,
Dang,
so
that's so
that's the
bizarre.
yeah. I don't like it, but I don't
Yeah.
think it's going away.
No, I mean you
The
can't beat the
Braves got
excitement.
bit by it the first year they did it in 2012. They lost the wild card game to the Cardinals when the Braves that were had a 4 or 5 game better record. They would have won the wild card easily under the old
Mm-hmm.
the old way that they did it. But there's no going back now, and with baseball probably expanding to 32 teams sometime in the next 10 years,
Oh, I haven't heard that. Okay.
it's not they're not going to make fewer playoff teams. When they add whenever that comes around. I have no inside information, but
Yeah.
it sounds like sometime in the next 5 to 8 years, you're probably going to get you're probably going to go from 30 to 32, from
Maybe
30 to
Charlotte,
32
maybe
teams.
Charlotte or Nashville will finally get that team
Yeah,
they've wanted.
Charlotte and Nashville. That one of those two would be a good shot, and then they really want to put another team back in Montreal. Uh,
Oh.
so which is kind of weird to me, but I guess
Hmm.
because they got the fan support was so bad the last few years,
Yeah, I remember.
but that stadium was a dump. So I guess they think if they build a good stadium, that they'll get the people
If you
back
build
out
it, they will
there.
come.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think Charlotte and Nashville would be pretty high on that list as well. Portland and Las Vegas, if they put a team in the West, I think would be places
I
they would
forgot
be
about Vegas.
considering.
Is Vegas not like the hot spot of where to put a new team these days? It
It kind
seems
of is
like.
right now, right? They got their hockey
Yeah.
team of all things, and then they got the Raiders.
Uh,
It wouldn't surprise me if they end up with all 4 sports sometime in the next, I don't know, 15 years.
mhm.
Uh, would not shock anybody, I don't think.
Okay, let's end it here with the Braves a little bit.
Yeah,
The By the way, the Sox looks like we got Sox in Houston in it, and Tampa Bay, of course, again, and San Fran will be in it. But we
right.
got
So
the
White Sox, White Sox and Astros and Rays have pretty much all but wrapped up the 3 divisions in the American League.
hmm.
And then the Brewers have pretty much wrapped up the Central Division. And
So
then the Giants right now and the Braves are looking pretty good for the East.
so how I guess the question then will be how will the Braves stack up against the Brewers? Because I have no idea.
Uh, the Braves will be pretty solid underdog in that series.
Hmm.
The Brewers have probably this. I mean, in my opinion, talent wise, they probably have the second best rotation. I think the Giants have a lower team ERA than the Brewers, but some of the Giants guys I think are a little bit smoke and mirrors. They're kind of guys that have never really pitched this well before. But yeah, with the Brewers, the top couple guys, in their rotation, um, are pretty elite. So that's gonna be a tough one. You always probably in playoff baseball, you're gonna kind of lean toward the team with better starting pitching in pretty much any playoff series. And so that's if you're asking me to if you ask me to put any kind of money on that, I would probably say the Brewers.
Hmm.
But the Braves, but that doesn't mean that the Braves couldn't do it. it's just I think the odds would be stacked a little bit in the Brewers' favor just because they do have the stronger starting pitching, and probably they have a better bullpen. Although the Braves' bullpen has been really good the last couple months. But
Yeah,
as far
okay.
if you want, if you go with past results, previous to 2021, Josh Hader is the closer for the Brewers, and he's one of the best guys out there. They have Brad Boxberger, who used to be a closer for the Rays, so that probably just through and through, just a better pitching staff
Mm,
uh, than the Braves do, the Brewers. So,
yeah.
but uh, they're not some. At the same time, they're not some behemoth you know where I would be absolutely stunned if the Braves won that series. But it would definitely take either the Braves hitters, figuring something out about the top few guys in that Brewers rotation. Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, Freddie
Hmm.
Peralta are the names of those top three guys. Or it would take the Braves pitchers kind of pitching at their absolute highest level. Right now, if the Braves were to set a playoff rotation, I assume they'd just go three guys. Right now, it'd be Charlie Morton, Max Fried, Ian Anderson. Those are the top three guys. Um, they're the fourth and fifth spots are kind of hit or miss right now. Uh,
Ah,
but yeah, I mean, but those guys, all three of those guys are good enough where they could on any given day go head to head with one of those Brewers pitchers. So you never know.
so what? Yeah.
I like to say that the baseball playoffs are kind of a complete crapshoot. Although I don't really blame Braves fans for not realizing that when it's seemed to go against that the said crapshoot has gone against the Braves pretty consistently for the last 20 years. Uh, but it really has a chance to be pretty random. So
Yeah.
maybe this is the year the Braves can step up.
Yeah.
They're only
Well.
going to win 86 or 87 games, but we've seen some
Mhm.
teams with that kind of record win the World Series in the last 10 or 12 years. So you never know.
Yeah. So that's good analysis because I had no clue as to how good the Brewers were, but I think that from what I hear you say, though, it sounds like the Braves are going to have to the pitchers are going to have to be on their A game for sure, and the offense is going to have to find some magic for the most part.
Yeah. And I mean, they've kind of they kind of went into a lull early this week. The division lead got down to one game on Sunday.
Mhm.
The Braves have now won four in a row, and I believe they're winning right now. They're playing a businessman special right now in Arizona. I believe they're winning. And the Phillies lost a couple in a row, so the lead's back up to 3 games
Mm.
with 10 games to go after today. So they're looking pretty good as far as making the playoffs. But yeah, they'll definitely have to find a little voodoo
Yeah,
if they're going to actually do much besides just make the playoffs.
and
But I
that's
think the way they
yeah.
started the season out, and with their best player Ronald Acuna being hurt halfway into the year,
Hmm.
you kind of have to be happy with just making the playoffs this year. As much as that kind of hurts to say after the way they came so close last year, and people were hoping they could get over the hump.
And that's,
Uh,
but when you have to me, that's a lot of times when you have a less than strong team. I mean, they're not less than strong, but when oftentimes past Braves teams, just looking back on my own memory, you need a guy. It's oftentimes not going to be, um, you know, as good of a season, for instance, as um, Riley's had this year.
right.
It is a lot of times it's going to be like the little guys, like the Mark Limke's or the Sid Breams that just find the magic, and then you're like, oh, this guy normally doesn't do, he just normally goes to work during the year, but all of a sudden he becomes a Superman,
Yeah.
unexpectedly, you know, seems like.
Yeah. I mean, the baseball playoffs are kind of a random number generator. And so, like you said, I mean, Mark Lemke, I think his career in the playoffs, hit like 380 or something like that. And then, in the regular season, he was really pretty much bad offensively. He wasn't very good
Right.
at all. Uh, but yeah, so when you're talking about that small, you play 162 regular season games, then you play, at most, what, at most like 20 uh,
Mhm.
playoff games. Pretty much anything can happen. So, like you said, those guys, yeah, Sid Bream, Mark Lemke, for the Braves, you could see somebody like Dansby Swanson or Jock Peterson, guys who haven't had great years. Travis d'Arnaud at catcher,
Mhm.
and they could be your best player for a series. They could carry you. It would not be the craziest thing that's happened.
Yeah. But then
Kind of
again,
happens every year for somebody. Just never seems to happen for the Braves anymore.
oh yeah, for sure. And with like, good, for instance, to use a football analogy, when you have a good quarterback that's a good manager of a game, somebody like Peyton Manning, for instance, or somebody that would just, like if they know how to manage the game, they don't even need to throw the football that much. When it comes to like the playoffs, if you've got only 5 games, best out of 5 games, if you've got the right pitching combination, I mean, you just throw one guy, two guy, then throw your second. Then if your number one guy's feeling good again on the third game, you just knock them out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean it can definitely come down to that. If one of the rotations gets hot, you just need a couple guys to pop a couple homers or a couple lucky ground balls even, and all of a sudden you got 1 or 2 runs and that's enough.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jared. Well, I appreciate it, and I think that we got the next few weeks we'll have something to talk about again. If you're going to be available, I know you got 2 kids going there with 2 new babies, anyways, in the house.
Yes, good times. Yeah, if I can stay awake, long enough, when we can do a baseball playoff preview, or maybe after the
Yeah,
first round, do a league LCS preview or something
yeah, that'd be good.
like
That'd be real
that. Yeah.
good. All right, Jared. Well, I appreciate it, and hope you have a good one. Thanks everybody for joining
You
us
too,
here.
Gene.
All right, talk to you later.